Claire Sterling navigated the shopping mall's food court, the silent motor of her wheelchair a stark contrast to the chaos of voices and smells around her. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but not the aura of power and sadness that enveloped her. For 2 years, her legs had been prisoners of a stubborn silence, a physical consequence of the betrayal that had shattered her life. She was a queen on a mobile throne, surrounded by luxury, but exiled from herself. The world, for her, had lost its color, and each day was just a gray repetition of the last, a routine of business and loneliness that kept her functional, but not alive. A soul paralyzed in a body that refused to obey. It was then that a child's voice, clear and surprisingly firm, cut through the ambient noise. "Ma'am, if you let me eat your leftovers, I'll make you walk again." Claire stopped, the sound of the wheels ceasing abruptly. She turned her head and saw a boy of no more than 8, in worn clothes and a cap that hid the hair. His eyes, however, were what held her. They were serious, deep, filled with a wisdom that didn't belong to his age. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. The boy, who introduced himself as Leo, repeated the offer, not as a beggar, but as a negotiator. "You can't walk. I can help. I just need the leftovers from your food." The audacity of the proposal left her speechless. How did he know? She always wore a blanket over her legs, a trick to keep her vulnerability hidden from the curious eyes of the world. The boy's answer was even more disconcerting. "I see these things," he said with a startling simplicity. "My grandfather taught me. He used to say that some people stop walking not because their legs are broken, but because their heart is broken." Leo's words were not a question. They were a diagnosis. They pierced the armor of coldness Claire had built around herself and touched directly on the open wound she refused to admit, still bled, the epicenter of her paralysis, a street kid, an impossible promise, and a painful secret. What does he know about her pain? If you believe that healing can come from the most unexpected sources, subscribe to the channel and like this video to unravel this emotional mystery. Before the wheelchair, Claire Sterling was a force of nature, a woman who was not born into wealth, but who built an empire from scratch, becoming the owner of one of the country's largest construction companies. Her presence was magnetic. Her laugh filled any room. She was the woman in high heels who commanded boardroom meetings with the same ease she danced a tango on a festive night. She believed in hard work, in loyalty, and above all, in the solid foundations she had built in her life. A 15-year marriage to Richard, the man she met in college, and a childhood friendship with Veronica, her confidant, her soul sister. She felt secure, unshakable, unaware that she was living on ground about to give way. The demolition of her world happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Returning early from a business trip, she found Richard's car next to Veronica's in the garage. The silence of the house was strange, heavy. She went up the stairs, her heart already beating out of sync. And then, upon opening the door to her own bedroom, the sanctuary of her marriage, she saw them. Her husband and her best friend, together in her bed. The betrayal was not a single stab, but a double one. A coordinated attack from the two people she trusted most in the world. The shock was so deep, so violent, that she didn't scream, didn't cry. She just felt something break inside her, a seismic snap that shattered the very structure of her reality. The next morning, the pain of her soul descended into her body. Claire woke up, and upon trying to get up, her legs did not obey. They simply wouldn't move. Panic gave way to a pilgrimage through hospitals and clinics. The country's best doctors examined her, MRIs, neurological tests, a battery of exams that cost a fortune. The result was always the same. Clinically, there was nothing wrong with her. The specialist's conclusion was a whisper she refused to hear. The paralysis was psychosomatic. Her mind, to protect her from an unbearable emotional pain, had shut down her legs. For a woman of action like Claire, accepting that her body was a prisoner of her broken heart was the most humiliating of defeats. Claire's rational mind screamed that this was absurd. Her assistant, Helen, materialized her thoughts in an urgent whisper. "Miss Sterling, be careful. This could be a scam. These street kids are smart. They know how to manipulate people." It was the voice of logic, of the cynical world Claire knew so well. But another voice, an older and almost forgotten one inside her, was intrigued. The boy hadn't asked for money. He had spoken of a broken heart with a surgical precision that no doctor had achieved. Torn between her skepticism and a spark of hope, she herself considered ridiculous, Claire relented. "All right, Leo, you can have the leftovers," she said, "but don't expect miracles. What I have can't be cured." The boy's response completely disarmed her. When Claire asked Helen to bring him a new meal, he refused with surprising firmness. "No, ma'am, if you give me free food, the deal doesn't work. It has to be leftovers." He then explained his grandfather's philosophy of the fair deal. "I help you, you help me. No one owes anyone a favor. That way, we're even." The purity of that logic struck Claire with force. The word fair echoed in her mind, a brutal contrast to the injustice that had imprisoned her. Her 15-year marriage, her lifelong friendship, it had all been a fraudulent deal. And there, a street kid was offering her the most honest transaction of her life. She ate in silence, observing him. He waited patiently, not with the anxiety of a beggar, but with the calm of a professional awaiting his part of the contract. When she finished, she pushed the tray with the leftovers in his direction. He approached, thanked her with a nod, and ate slowly, with a dignity that moved her deeply. There was no desperation in his hunger, only the satisfaction of a fair exchange. That behavior, so different from everything she expected, continued to dismantle her defenses. This boy was no con artist. He operated with a code of honor that shamed the sophisticated world she was a part of. Upon finishing, he stood up, his serious gaze once again fixed on her. "Thank you, Ms. Claire," he said. She was startled that he knew her name. "I heard the lady say it," he explained, pointing to Helen. "I'll be back tomorrow, same time. I'll bring some things my grandfather used, things that will help you." And with the same naturalness with which he arrived, he disappeared into the mall's crowd, leaving behind a skeptical businesswoman, a suspicious assistant, and the ghost of an impossible promise. Claire didn't know who this boy was, or what he would bring the next day, but for the first time in 2 years, she felt a reason to wait for tomorrow. Andrew, her driver for over a decade, was the silent witness to Claire's long night. He had known her as the vibrant woman who built an empire, a force of nature that seemed indestructible. And for the past 2 years, he had watched her become a shadow of herself, a queen exiled in her own body. His daily routine was the score of a life in mourning, from the mansion to the company, from the company to useless physical therapy sessions, from treatment to the same lonely lunch at the mall. He transported her in a luxury car, but he felt like he was driving a hearse, carrying a soul that had given up on living. Her pain was a constant, silent passenger in the back seat. That's why, when the routine began to break, Andrew was the first to notice. On that second day, taking her to lunch, he felt a new energy in her, an expectation that hadn't been there before. From his discreet position, he watched the boy approach her table again. His first reaction was alarm, his protective instinct screaming that this was dangerous. He saw the boy kneel, touch his boss's feet, place stones. It was a bizarre, surreal scene that defied all logic. He thought about intervening, about calling security, about protecting her from what seemed to be an elaborate scam. But then he saw Claire's face. And for the first time in 2 years, she didn't look absent. She looked present. In the days that followed, Andrew witnessed the strangest of therapies, the boy, the stones, the whispered stories. It was a ritual his rational mind couldn't comprehend, but whose results he couldn't deny. Claire began to change. They were small things, almost imperceptible to a stranger, but glaring to him. The way she started looking out the car window, observing the city. The casual question about his wife's health. A gesture of interest in the outside world that had vanished. And most shockingly of all, the request one afternoon that he detour and drive past Millennium Park, the place where she used to run. He didn't know what the boy was doing, but he was seeing the magic happen. In the solitude of her room, night after night, Claire fought a silent battle. Following Leo's instructions, she closed her eyes and tried to communicate with her legs, not with commands, but with memories. She remembered the feeling of sand under her feet, the joy of a run in the park, the power. She felt walking through a construction site, and then on a rainy pre-dawn morning it happened. A spasm, a tiny, almost imaginary movement in the big toe of her right foot. She held her breath, her heart racing. She tried again, and there it was, an unmistakable twitch. After 2 years of silence, her body had finally answered her call. The tears that rolled down her face were not of sadness, but of a hopeful and terrifying shock. The next day, upon arriving at the mall, Claire found Leo, accompanied by a tiny figure with blonde hair and immense eyes. "This is my sister, Leah," he said. The girl, only 5 years old, looked at Claire not with a child's shyness, but with a depth that unsettled her. Before Claire could tell them about her progress, Leah approached the wheelchair, placed her small hands on Claire's knees, and in a sweet, firm voice, uttered a truth that shook the businesswoman's world. "You want to walk," the girl said, "but you're afraid." Claire was paralyzed. The child's raw intuition striking at the core of a feeling she hadn't even admitted to herself. "Afraid of what?" Claire asked, her voice a whisper. Leah's response was the most profound and painful revelation of her journey. "Afraid of getting better, and him coming back to hurt you again." The 5-year-old's words were like a lightning bolt, illuminating the dark basement where Claire had locked her emotions. It was true. Her paralysis had become a shield. As long as she was broken, no one could hurt her again. Getting well meant becoming vulnerable again. It meant risking another suffering. The child, with her ancient wisdom, had just named the invisible chains that Claire herself had wrapped around her legs. A prison built on the fear of being strong and free again. The childish logic that followed was irrefutable. But if you don't walk, you'll stay hurt anyway. So it's better to walk and be strong, Leah concluded, with a simplicity that disarmed any argument. Claire looked at these 2 children, orphans of the street, who understood the geography of her soul better than any specialist. She realized that her battle was not just physical, it was a fight against her own ghosts. The cure didn't mean going back to being the woman she was before, but becoming someone who could be at the same time strong and vulnerable. The seed of the turnabout was planted. Her goal was no longer just to move her legs, it was to free her heart. The truth has been revealed by the mouth of a child, and now the battle is internal. If you've ever had to fight your own fears to move forward, share your story in the comments and subscribe to the channel to see Claire's journey to her true liberation. Leah's revelation was the key that unlocked Claire's final chains. Freed from the subconscious fear of healing, her progress became exponential. The sessions with Leo in the food court transformed into daily celebrations of small victories. The tingling became movement. Her toes now obeyed, her ankles began to awaken. It was then that the ghost of her past called. It was Richard, her ex-husband, his voice an echo of the pain she was overcoming. He asked for a meeting, using the excuse of urgent company business. The old Claire would have hidden behind her lawyers, but the new woman, guided by a child's wisdom, saw this not as a threat, but as the final, necessary confrontation for her total liberation. That night, the mansion's living room became a courtroom. Richard entered, And Claire saw immediately that he was not the powerful man who had left her, but a diminished version, haunted by his own choices. He didn't sit, just stood nervously, and confessed in a choked voice that his affair with Veronica was over. But the revelation he brought was much darker than the end of an affair. "Claire, it wasn't what you think," he said, the words stumbling out. "Veronica, she planned everything. She wanted you to find us." The confession hung in the air, a truth so perverse it was almost impossible to absorb. He admitted to being weak, a pawn in the game of a woman far crueler than he. "What do you mean she planned everything?" Claire asked, her voice dangerously calm. Richard, unable to meet her eyes, revealed the full depth of Veronica's malice. "She wanted you to see us. She calculated the day and time. She said the shock would destroy you emotionally, that you would break down, and then it would be easier for us to take control of everything, of your money." The truth was a monster. It hadn't been a crime of passion, but an act of coldly calculated psychological warfare, orchestrated by the woman she once called a sister. The goal was never just to steal her husband. It was to annihilate her spirit, to plunder her empire. A betrayal of a magnitude that transcended the heart and targeted the soul. The revelation, however, did not break Claire. On the contrary, it forged the broken pieces of her heart into a weapon. The pain, the sadness, and the fear that had paralyzed her for 2 years transmuted into a wave of pure, overwhelming fury. It was the righteous anger of a woman who refused to be the victim in someone else's script. This energy, powerful and raw, traveled through her body like an electric current, awakening every dormant nerve. She felt a strength in her legs she hadn't felt in years. And as Richard watched her, stunned, she placed her hands on the arms of the chair, pushed with all the force of her soul, and for the first time in 2 years, she stood up. Standing, trembling but unshakable, Claire faced the man who was a ghost in her own house. Richard looked at her as if he'd seen an apparition, unable to process the miracle his cruelty had ironically provoked. "Get out of my house," she said, and her voice was not that of a victim, but of a queen retaking her throne. He tried to stammer an apology, but she cut him off with the coldness of steel. "Your words are empty. You were a cowardly pawn in a dirty game. The only thing I want from you is your disappearance." And then she took the first step of her new life, a slow, deliberate movement toward him that made him back away in fear and shame. The next morning, a new Claire awoke. The first thing she did was not call her lawyers, but her driver. She went to the mall, walking with the help of a cane, eager to tell Leo about her progress. But the bench where they always met was empty. A cold panic seized her. She asked the shopkeepers, the security guards. No one had seen them. At the pharmacy, an employee remembered a boy trying to get cough syrup the night before. What was once a journey of personal healing suddenly became a rescue mission. The children who had saved her now needed to be saved by her. The long-dormant businesswoman awoke with a protective fury. Claire mobilized her resources, her assistant, her contacts. In a few hours she discovered what she feared. Leo had been found alone and taken to Child Protective Services, and his sister, Leah, sick, to a public hospital. The woman who yesterday struggled to move her own legs was now moving the world to find the 2 children who had become the center of her universe. There was no more room for her own pain. Her entire being was focused on a single task, to bring them home to a safe place. The patient had become the protector, and her newfound strength found its true purpose. At the Child Services building, after a bureaucratic battle, she was finally allowed to see Leo. The boy, scared and alone, ran into her arms when he saw her enter the room. "Leah is sick," he whispered. "I know, my love, and I'm going to take care of you both," she promised. At that moment, before a social worker who questioned her about her relationship with the children, Claire found the truest answer of her life. "What is your interest in taking responsibility for them?" the woman asked. Claire looked at the boy in her arms and said with a certainty that came from her soul, "They are my family." The word, once synonymous with betrayal, was now her new foundation. Leo's fair deal had transformed. Claire began the complex legal process to become the children's guardian, fighting with the same grit with which she had once built her company. She had Leah transferred to the best hospital in the city and spent her afternoons by her bedside, just as Leo had spent his afternoons by her wheelchair. One night, the boy found her in the living room, looking at the river stones he had used on her feet. "Our deal changed, didn't it?" he asked. Claire smiled, her heart overflowing. "Yes, my son, the deal changed. It's no longer about helping me walk, it's about helping each other be a family." Her cure was complete, for she understood that the real miracle wasn't walking, it was loving again. Months later, Claire Sterling's mansion was unrecognizable. The silence had been expelled by the laughter of two children and by the sound of firm steps on the marble floor. The adoption of Leo and Leah was finalized, and they officially became a family forged not by blood, but by a fair deal made in a food court, a pact of broken souls who decided to heal each other. Claire didn't just walk again, she ran, she danced, she lived again. The children, in turn, found the security of a home and the love of a mother who, in her journey to save them, ended up saving herself. True to her promise, Claire used her experience to create something larger. With the help of Leo, who became her young consultant on wisdom, she founded an institute to help people with emotional trauma. The method, affectionately named the Fair Deal Therapy, combined psychological support with the boy's simple philosophy. Healing happens when we find someone to help. The foundation connected people who were suffering with causes that needed support, proving that purpose was the most powerful of remedies. The ruthless businesswoman had become a philanthropist, transforming her pain into a bridge for the healing of hundreds of others. As for Richard and Veronica, the architects of her pain, Claire never again wasted a thought on them. The news of their cruel plan eventually circulated in their social circles, tarnishing their reputations indelibly. They were left with their money and their status, but in a world of empty connections, while Claire found a richness they could never comprehend, that of a true family and a life's purpose. The best revenge, she discovered, was not retaliation, but happiness. Her full and loving life made the memory of their betrayal small, distant, and finally, insignificant. Claire's journey began with the paralysis of a body, caused by a heart broken by the most unfair of deals. She was healed not by medicine, but by a child who taught her about a different kind of deal, a fair deal, where healing is a two-way street. By offering the leftovers of her meal, she received the leftovers of a forgotten hope. By giving a home to two lost children, she rebuilt her own. For she learned the deepest lesson of all, that sometimes the cure is not in receiving what we lack, but in giving the little we have left, proving that even the leftovers of a broken heart can feed and heal the world. A journey that proves that healing can come from where you least expect it. If the hearts of Claire, Leo, and Leah have touched yours, subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. Let's celebrate the families that are bound not by blood but by love.